They sent out surveys to over 1,000 people, very in-depth interviews of about 55 people. When they asked people, well, what exactly were you doing when this spiritual awakening got underway? And the number one thing were the Goenka Vipassana courses. Another thing came to light in terms of deep stage realization. They were doing at least 2 or 3 different techniques. The extraordinary states that were coming about from the Vipassana, tranquility, equanimity, wasn't really translating outside of the meditation. The Vipassana is it's really not processing out. It's trying to come at this to build a sense of equanimity about the pain and suffering that's inside of us, but it's really not effectively doing anything to, permanently discharge it.
So many meditators and stuff are coming into this practice with thinking they've broken their brains or something. And it almost becomes like this view that you're looking at through the world. Like, this is just how reality is. TRE and somatic modalities of some degree can really like shake that up and almost like break the VR headset that you've been looking through ever since you started practicing. Such a huge contrast. I remember like how brutal that was when I was meditating, doing like things like Vipassana and wondering like, why is this practice not working? Why is this not giving me the goods? Like, why is this not getting rid of this social angst, and like being so humiliated by it and like ashamed of myself for not being a good meditator. And the following is an incredibly important conversation that I had with my friend Chris Guimond for round 2. So thanks for coming on, Chris. This conversation is really important because we talk about and we extract from Chris's 14 years of diehard Vipassana meditation experience. And I was very earnest about it too, but not for nearly as long as Chris. Our experience of what it was like transitioning from Vipassana to other practices like non-dual teachings or trauma integration work as well. And we talk about the challenges that people might be having and facing, and just our perspective on it as to how you can sort of shift into a greater sense of well-being and insight rather than being stuck with one given technique. So Chris comes at this with not a vindicating mindset or myself either, of like Vipassana is bad and we need to amend all these things, but we definitely have some critiques on it and things that we've learned from our experience by doing the hard yards that we talk about in depth in this conversation. There's a lot in here that's it's just so good, and especially as it relates to things like social anxiety, which is a focus of this channel as of late. Other than that, yeah, this is a treat. If you have a Vipassana meditation practice, or you have a very serious practice in another tradition as well, this will also apply to you. Also integrating trauma and these sorts of things in adjunct to meditation practice. So thank you very much and enjoy the video, and I know you'll get a lot out of it. So yeah, thanks for joining me, Chris. Thank you for being here. We were just having a conversation before we started talking here, and the intention really for this call was you said yourself, Chris, that you wanted to be one of just really like helpfulness toward people. How would you sort of say that intention that you mentioned before?
Yeah, what I would say is just, given my background in meditation, Vipassana in particular, maybe to share some things that I learned along the way. I think, could be useful for people that are, in that tradition.
Yeah, and same here. I've had my own experience.
I wish I knew.
Yeah, and we can sort of synergize here a little bit with different angles to see like what is supportive of people's like liberation from suffering rather than confusion of needing to, just doubt themselves that they're even doing Vipassana or something like that. Or it's not really like that. I don't think. I don't really want to come with that energy of like shunning it or anything like that, or but there certainly have been some fixations I'm sure we can pick up on fixations I say, but challenges maybe that have been illuminated to us just with practice experience. So I thought maybe I could just read off a bunch of then this might take a little bit just to read them off, but this is when I was reflecting on my experience earlier on when I was trying to transition to something like Vipassana, away from Vipassana, having been doing a lot of it. which I still sort of do in a different way. I just don't do it in the formal SN Goenka tradition style, you know? So some of the things I came up with, I don't want to meet the gravity of suffering and have to then address it in a different way because I'm attached to a certain technique. Right. So people are feeling a lot of suffering and they've been doing quite a bit of Vipassana meditation. So it's like, I don't want to change to another technique. That's something I can relate to. Another one is, so there's 7 here I listed in the email I sent to you. I'm worried about leaving the only community I've ever been acquainted with for a long time, like a serious meditation community. So if they change Vipassana from Vipassana, they might lose friends, right? Or my community will be judging me from partaking in a new technique. So it sort of ties into the other one. I'll feel out of integrity. I'll feel like I've failed and my group will find out. Something like that. Or maybe they've failed themselves. Yeah, so I'll read these out, and then maybe we can riff on them or whatever feels intuitively right to go to. But so I can't do anything else because if I do my Vipassana, friends will think of me as like a cross blender of techniques. So this is all like the community ones, like cross blending techniques is kind of shunned. I know it's like only use this one technique, and you mentioned it's subliminally communicated in the way that like in the documentation and entry process and stuff. So teachers such as SN Goenka, this is the 5th one, teachers such as SN Goenka or other teachers speak against trying to use any other spiritual practice, and that's subliminally, this is what I just said, that's subliminally communicated as the one true church, I think is a well phrase you used. And this, it boxes people into double down on their practice rather than opening up to something else. That's what I felt. And 2 more here. So feeling absolutely overwhelmed by the amount of techniques available out there. And in quotes, like I've already tried so much stuff and practiced for so long, and yet I'm still suffering. Learning anything else will just be new age and useless. Like Vipassana is like the one thing that's going to save me or something. Like that's how I felt. And then rejecting the adoption of practices to help them feel more ease. Like I need to get to the root of craving and aversion. So if I try anything that's like going to make me feel better, like TRE or you know, like somatic modalities of some sort, somatic inquiry, whatever. I've
actually encountered that from people who've reached out to me and say, I feel like I'm sabotaging am I sabotaging this work I'm doing with Vipassana by addressing the trauma with TRE?
Yeah. Or maybe we could start there then, if that's alive for you. So what do you see with people in when they come to catch up with you for awakening guidance and that sort of stuff? I know specifically that, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, where to start with this? One thing that like I would say is the way I see it is if we think kind of like how neuroscience has had something to offer for people interested in let's say non-dual realization, right? It's definitely been making a contribution. I think in the same way, like what we've learned from body-oriented psychotherapy has made quite a significant contribution, which is still yet to kind of really kind of penetrate into this community to the degree that, one would hope that, but I think the thing is that it's always good for people to ask what their objectives are, to really be honest with themselves. Like, what am I trying to get from this Vipassana technique? Am I trying to feel better, right? Am I trying to manage like anxiety or depression? Or am I really interested in awakening, right? To just be clear about that. But I would say, like in either case, I think that if you are just going on the Vipassana technique alone and not being willing to kind of like look, more broadly at what's out there, you're definitely going to make things tougher for yourself. And there's some things that we know now that can really help a lot with either of these. One of the things I would say that I think is like super practical, super useful to know or to consider here is many people when they go to Vipassana in the first place, one of the things that they'll say is like, I just have a sense I have too many thoughts, and those thoughts are painful, right? And when you go to Vipassana retreat, I think one of the really interesting things about Vipassana, and it's one of the, I think, places you can get the clearest perspective of that, is how many sensations are going on in the body that we don't normally have access to in our day-to-day conscious awareness, right? It just becomes really clear in a 10-day Vipassana retreat that, in a way, it kind of becomes kind of almost like a real psychedelic experience, in that our, consciousness just gets so subtle that we can pick up a lot of the subtlety of the sensations in the body. And the thing is that what we need to understand is like, what's driving compulsive thinking, right? Just day-to-day compulsive thinking, that excessive thinking. It's really these excess sensations that have accumulated in the body. And it's kind of like we're up against a static noise, like there's sensations that have to do with, a lot of like repressed emotion. We go on a 10-day Vipassana retreat, the mind will calm down, quiet down a lot, as, you go into that meditative state. But going back home, I think like the typical experience of a Vipassana meditator is that they get increasingly, that access to silence, and equanimity within the meditation. But in my experience and many other people, it's really slow going in terms of, bringing that quietude and equanimity back into day-to-day life. And I know for me, it was, even after many years, more than 10 years, it was getting up out of my 1 hour sit, just feeling like, oh, I'm so relieved to be done with my spiritual practice. And the mind would just kind of go back, into that compulsive thinking, right? Really, really dissociating, really checking out of what's here and now. And I came to realize that the Vipassana is really not processing out trauma, right? It's trying to come at this to build a sense of equanimity about the pain and suffering that's inside of us. But it's really not effectively doing anything to permanently discharge it.
Yeah, beautifully. Yeah, I really relate, and just the analogy that came to mind that I remember hearing, I think it was from Michael Taft, and I'm translating it in this context, but it's almost like Vipassana might look like something like, and this has been my experience, so, and it sounds like maybe yours, but it's almost like there's a jar of hornets of sensation that we're completely unaware of at first before we go into Vipassana. And then we become aware of the jar of hornets, especially if we have trauma, when we go out of the thinking mind that's on rapid fire constantly as the default baseline, basically, and you become aware of the sensation in the body, then there's this jar of hornets. But Vipassana isn't so much cycling out those hornets and releasing them one hornet after the other so that there's more tranquility. It's more like you're just left with watching the hornets from like as like a and that can really run awry in daily life and affect your productivity in a variety of ways. So and in my experience, I just want to comment how that showed up was I remember very distinctly, like very much like what you said, I would do my 1 hour sit because I was very serious about this, like after the first retreat, I did the 2 hours every day and without failing basically for multiple years, I think like 2 years, and it was much the same, like I felt like in retrospect, it felt quite mechanical at that stage of practice, just with the presentation of those sensations that were coming up for me. I guess it was like, I think it felt very, very, very uncomfortable to do the sit sometimes. And then I would sort of have to just push myself. It's like, okay, I've got my 1 hour in today, I'm good. And then I would get up And then there was a repressed emotions. And I remember even like engaging with family members and stuff in the house was challenging because I was feeling so dysregulated. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think at that time as well, I was kind of ashamed of the fact that I couldn't get the technique right. So it was almost like this extra layer of shame of like, okay, I'm feeling a lot of dysregulated energy in the body. And now, and I should be beyond this because I've done I've done a couple retreats actually, and I've been doing the practice so much, which made me double down on the practice even more actually. And last thing I want to add on that from my experience is I think what you said at the start is so important actually. It's like what do I actually want to get out of this? Like, what do I want to get out of this? And I remember when I think I read that in Daniel Ingram's book, Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. He's like, make sure you really reflect on that. And I remember when I was really suffering, like, I remember reading that, and I'm like, yeah, I'll just do that later. I'll think about that later. Like, I won't actually think about what I want because I think at that time maybe it was almost too painful to admit that I might want something that wasn't in congruence with what Goenka was prescribing me, or like the tradition in general of Vipassana. You know, not just Goenka, not like saying he's a bad guy or anything, because it's a great technique, um, but I just didn't want to admit to myself because I was feeling so much like hopelessness and the energetic uncomfortability, and that I was really hoping that Vipassana would be the thing that would like liberate me from that. So if I were to basically, you know, like double down on it, then eventually I would have that breakthrough insight where everything would just be sunshine and rainbows and all of those hornets would just fly out of the jar, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah. And I remember just wanting to bypass that question, but I think one of the most profitable things that I did, I think it really hit home for me just because the conditions lined up. And I remember, I think it was Nargis. Angelo did an interview with that girl Nargis in the non-dual community. And she was really pointed out the importance of addressing seeking energy, and at that time that just landed for me. And I remember she like invited me to ask these questions like, why am I seeking? Like what will it get me? And or like what would awakening get me that isn't here right now in this moment right now, you know? And it was like it was so revealing because it was like what I actually wanted, like some of the things that were coming up. My intuition is that I definitely wanted deeper spiritual realization without a doubt. But the shadow piece for that was like, actually I want to feel better. Actually, I want to do that so I can get more validation from people, so I can be special. Actually, so that, you know, and just the rabbit hole was deep, and to see that and to actually take a more active investigation, which I think we tend to shun in Vipassana, to take a more like, because it's like it's not bare observation. It's like we're being too active with the mind. We're using thoughts, and that's like bad, right? We shouldn't do that. Also, and that's the belief I had. Um, but to do that, it was so profitable, and there's been a lot more like almost like spiritual insight that's like come from that sort of very radical, honest investigation. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's my prolonged follow up on what you said on that, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, I'd like to just kind of mention, just touch on Osho for a moment. Not somebody I ever did a deep dive on Osho. Although I'm reading Osho's Book of Secrets at the moment, which is a book that Gary had recommended a while back. But in Osho's book, he talks about, I don't know if you know anything about Osho.
I watched The Wild Wild Country. Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah,
bug one.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a very complicated topic about Osho. I will say I had a certain perspective on Osho that Gary had me kind of step back from thinking I knew everything about Osho and just be dismissive. He says, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater." Even with all the controversy and spectacle, he said, nevertheless, there was something there that
you look
yeah,
into his eyes in like on like YouTube videos, and I can see why people like how and why he became a cult leader, right? Like
Yeah.
yeah, he's got a lot of insight for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say this. I think Osho had, he was kind of ahead of his time in terms of,
Mm.
like looking at like people, especially like in Western culture, right? And what they were up against. And that was a perspective, I think, a lot of, let's say, maybe like in the Guimond tradition was not acknowledging, that, Western people were very much up in their head, you know, and then we have to, understand like why is that? I don't think that was really, kind of like understood, by either side. But I think Osho actually had a pretty good insight about it. And so I don't know if you ever like you saw in Wild Wild West this kind of active meditation where people were jumping and
Yeah, yeah, energetic stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know, there's some people that think that there's something there that has something to do with TRE. I'm not so sure, but I think like at the very least, he did actually recognize like there's something about this physical tension and let's say neuroticism that, compulsive thinking, and that people had to do something to deal with this,
Hmm.
this accumulated, stress and tension, and that once you did that, then you would discover that the center itself is silent, so instead of having that attitude, okay, I'm going to meditate my way into silence, Osho correctly recognized, no, that silence is at the center. You just need to uncover it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So that rejection of practice of anything outside of Vipassana, the invitation with that in that line of thinking might be that, hey, like actually for you to consider doing another practice, whatever that looks like for you, outside of just Vipassana is actually a viability. And not only that is it might very well be an accelerator for deepening spiritual unfoldment for you. But that piece of getting really honest with yourself is super valuable, I think, as well.
Mm.
Can you maybe speak to your transition, like what that was like for you, what was happening for you, and I know that might not be a clear cut, like okay, I'm now exiled from Vipassana or anything, but like because you said you did Vipassana for 14 years in the formal way, and then something sort of became apparent to you where you realized that it wasn't really giving you what you would hope for, and then
Mm.
then you shifted. So can you maybe like reflect on what was happening for you in your mind at that time? Like, and I know it's been a while, so I don't expect you to nail it or anything, but like, were there any doubts that you were coming up against of like, like maybe I shouldn't do this, or anything that we've sort of already touched on?
Something was definitely happening in the sense of just looking at myself and feeling like, wow, I've put 14 years into this. I've really invested a lot.
Mm,
Um, and to go to the 10-day silent retreats it's a lot for your family. It's a lot for my husband to basically look after the household. And I was so committed to it. I really was quite sure I would be doing it for the rest of my life.
mm,
And then I would say, over maybe I don't know, 13 years into it, something like that, I started to start this period of reflection, just looking at myself. And I think, something was happening in the whole, awakening process itself. Something was kind of like coming forth where, I had started this awakening process in 2001. And that was really big. That really motivated me to kind of keep going with Vipassana for the next 14 years.
mm,
But I truly felt like I had gotten stalled, like, uh, that it was a kind of a mystery to me. And I was aware of the tension that I had, and I was very aware of this painful jaw tension. And if anything, it was getting worse and worse. So, just kind of feeling that, uh, just reflecting on where I was, doubts started to really arise. And, I had a meditation room in my house, and I would go into the meditation room, and what started was I would sit down, and I realized I couldn't do the meditation. Like, it just kind of started to come where I couldn't do the Vipassana anymore. And it was kind of interesting. It was like the very will to be able to continue doing it was falling away, and I could not access that will. It was just, I remember even, thinking, well, no, I'm not going to give it up. Like, thinking, I don't know what's happening, and try to push my way through it. But that's just the way it happened, truly. Like, it wasn't really even like so much a conscious decision, but like the capacity to do it just came to a grinding halt. And so it felt like it wasn't even so much a decision in that way. And yet still, I kind of went through about a year of feeling a little bit lost, because it took me by surprise in a way. I didn't see that coming. And I really didn't know anything else. Like, I didn't know anything to go to, and felt kind of bereft. And then I think I somehow, oh yeah, I know what happened. I met someone. It's a bit of a story I won't go into right now, but I met someone and heard the term non-duality. And then went on, found on YouTube a lot of people talking about non-duality, and it was just such an eye-opener. And it was just, I felt like, wow, I've been in this little community, really oblivious to what's happening in the outside world. And there's like a lot of stuff going on. It felt so exciting, actually. And also to feel like, wow, there really are people actually waking up, something that wasn't talked about in Vipassana. It was just kind of presented it as not a realistic goal in this lifetime, certainly not liberation.
Can I, if you don't mind, can I just jump in there? I think one thing that really, I can almost feel as you were describing, like you were doing this, so you're in this place where you've been doing this for 14 years, yeah, and there's a sense of like coming to a grinding halt of like stickiness or something. And I can relate to that experience of, maybe not in the way that you're describing, but that feeling of like you're so familiar with doing this, like almost like your meditation rounds or something, but there's just this like, oh, like something isn't quite right. Like I can feel it in my neck here. It's like something isn't quite, like, I don't know, it's just like it's monotonous, it's routine based. But one thing that also occurred to me when you were speaking is I feel like if someone was in that place, there's a lot of familiarity with a certain practice, right? So again, like you doing it for quite a long time, there might be this sense of almost like fear behind that like, oh man, like if I change and even consider something else, then I've failed the Vipassana technique that I'm so familiar with. And like, and there's almost like a fear of resignation to the fact that there might be something else out there, and what the whole conditioned, the whole a lot of the momentum has been for naught if I give up now. Maybe it's like or like I'm a failed meditator if I try something else and even consider something outside of the scope of what Goenka, or like just all of the subliminal beliefs that I've accumulated through all of my practice history, like that occurred to me that might be something that somebody might be coming up against. So I don't know if you agree or if you relate to that, and if there's something that that comes up to you that you might be helpful for someone in that place.
Yeah. One thing I want to just maybe explain about this as well. In the last 2 years before I left Vipassana, it wasn't like my Vipassana practice had become stale and routine. If anything, I was really having incredible breakthroughs in terms of the Vipassana technique, and getting into extraordinary states of jhanas, which Goenka doesn't even talk about, but they were just happening. And I could actually, what was interesting about that was it felt, I could feel something kind of seductive about it. I could sense it, that it felt like it had, something of a potential addictive pull to it. And yet, I I felt like it was almost like this sense of caution about it, that something just dawned on me that this could be a potential trap. That's
Like an instinct there that it's like it's like this sweet addictive thing that could turn into a fixation. Yeah, so yeah, okay, that's interesting then. So my experience was a little bit different, where I felt a sense of exhaustion and basically beaten upness from the Vipassana, whereas you were more so coming at it through the lens of this is actually advancing, something's advancing spiritually, but perhaps there's a fixation that my intuition's picking up on, that this isn't all what I'm after. Yeah.
I felt like the extraordinary states that were coming about from the Vipassana, like the extraordinary states of tranquility, equanimity, it wasn't really translating outside of the meditation. Not in a meaningful way, not really in a meaningful way, considering how many years I'd been at it.
And you also mentioned you still had quite a bit of tension in the body. So it was almost like there were these transient jhana states that were occurring in this very routine-based way of meditating. And then the translation into daily life wasn't fully there. And there was an instinct that maybe there's something else at this point. And that was after the 14 years of doing it very seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, another thing I'll just add too is there was more energy that was being released in the body. And I think that it was, like basically colliding with this areas of contraction. And the whole thing was, there was like more energy kind of accumulating in the upper body, right? And this kind of felt like, wow, you know what? Like this message just to cultivate equanimity, man, I worked my ass off trying to do that. I was like,
I get the mental image of like shaking a Coke bottle and it's like the lid's on still, and it's like, you got to take the lid off, or we can just keep meditating through it or something, which is the promise. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well that makes a lot of sense, and so then you found out about non-duality and you started sort of transitioning based on an instinctual pull there. Yeah. What would you say sort of transpired energetically when you and in moving into daily life with practice? How did that really, like, that transition, if you could call it that? Because I'm sure you're still doing Vipassana amidst this like quote unquote transition, maybe. You can tell me so you fully stopped Vipassana entirely.
The process stopped on its own.
Right.
There was just no kind of like maintaining it. It was like I said, it just came to a stop on its own.
Yeah, so the train just like turned off the engine at some point and just came to a slow stop naturally. Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say slow.
Right. Yeah. The Hogwarts train that's been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
But okay, so I think that's an important piece as well, is that this is you're just speaking from your direct experience and this is your path. So it's not to say that like someone needs to stop Vipassana or something like that. It's like listen deeply to your instinct, and I come at it through the same way as well. And I think that's an important piece to bring to this. It's like two experiential recounts of some of the things that we're struggling with. Yeah. And before maybe we go into your experience, and maybe I can riff on it a bit too, of going to another practice. I also mentioned some other things before, that there's quite a bit of momentum, and I think maybe you could speak to this more than me, but there's quite a bit of momentum of like maybe fear of loss of community or something. If you were to transition, if your instinct was telling you to, okay, I'm going to try something else. It's like, what do you think that some of the challenges people might be seeing with that sort of like opening up to maybe a different way of practicing with if they've been enmeshed in this I'll say enmeshed, but if they've been in Vipassana for quite a long time, you know. Is there anything that
Yeah.
comes to mind?
Absolutely. I think this is a very common problem when people have been part of a particular tradition, that it can be quite a challenge when you leave. Maybe, it it can be very difficult, because for people that are still there, it can be kind of perceived as kind of a criticism, that they're still there and you've left, right? You've moved on. People can take it very personally. There can be, things that are said, not said about your decision. People expressing concern that you've been at it for so long, and saying, just, take a break and come back. It'll pass, that sort of thing. I experienced that. I've seen that happen to other people as well.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, friendship is really important, on a spiritual path or not, right? But I think, on a spiritual path, like, friendship can be like a very valuable thing to have.
Mm-hmm.
And that was definitely something that I wouldn't say it was like one of the main things, but it was definitely something that I came up against. And but I did find I did make friends. Like, I did seek out new people, within the next couple of years. And those people are all really good friends even now.
That's great. So it worked out nicely for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you just reacclimatize and you find your tribe. And I think that trusting of your own internal compass can really help guide that. Because I think you even said there that it wasn't really a huge deal, but it definitely felt there was something there,
Yeah.
Did you receive any sort of judgment or separation of friendships, if you don't mind commenting on, or anything like that, or not really?
Yeah. It was, definitely. People were reaching out, trying, just kind of expressing concern and wishing me well. But it was, I felt somewhat this pressure to be, reconsidering my decision.
Yeah, like with meta, and then like subtly trying to pull you back in or something,
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. And what do you think about that sentiment of like cross blending of techniques? Because I feel like there's a lot of momentum to want to perhaps, this is my interpretation, is that there is, if you're signing up to these retreats and there's these constant reinforcements of you shouldn't, have you done any different techniques in the past couple of years or something? That's like one of the screening questions. And then in the discourses as well, there's talk of like you shouldn't don't. I think the discourse is, and I mentioned this before, but it's like, don't dig heaps of shallow wells in your experience. Go straight for the source, right? And the promise would be that that technique of body scanning or bare awareness, noticing, would be the thing that will take you to the bottom of the well. So it's almost like there's quite a bit of shame or self-doubt that is heavily reinforced by A, the guru, but B, the whole community, that if I try something else, then I'm sort of failing here, So I don't know if anything comes up to you for like cross-blending techniques and what it might look like. Maybe a word of encouragement there or something for somebody. Or...
you know what, I don't think that that's unique to Vipassana. I think that's pretty common to a lot of, different traditions. And maybe it has its own purpose to help people to focus, to get well established, to not, have doubt about the effectiveness of the technique.
Yeah.
But I think we're in very different times right now. I mean, it's really incredible. We're not, in like, 2000 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or even 25 years ago. It's really kind of extraordinary. Let's call it like the, open source, information that's out there, that people have available, and I think that this is contributing in a big way to like the numbers of people that are actually going through the awakening process and getting to deep stage realization in unprecedented numbers is because of, we're sharing a lot of practical stuff. That's the reality. If I can say something like that, maybe just to kind of about this, like engaging in, maybe more than one technique at a time. I started to work with Gary Weber in, I think it was late 2015, early 2016. First time I'd worked with a teacher one-on-one, extraordinary teacher. And he had been part of the study that Judd Brewer did at Yale on meditators that had done 10,000 plus hours of meditation. I don't know if you know about that study, but he'd also been.
Is this the variety of contemplative experiences one that Willoughby Britton did and stuff, or was Jed part of this?
I don't know if she was part of that. I don't think so. I think this was just Judd Brewer.
Separate one. Yeah. I haven't seen that study then, but yeah, okay. I'm curious. Yeah, what did they do in it?
They were just taking people who had done more than 10,000 hours of meditation and then doing like putting them in an fMRI, doing psychological testing and so on. But Gary had, basically made himself available to anybody doing research in, cognitive neuroscience and Vipassana, in any kind of research on awakening. Said, I will make myself freely available if, what I've been able to get with his own process, if that could be useful for anybody. And so do you know who Jeffrey Martin is from the Finders course? So he was, he's a psychologist who he created the Finders course, if you've ever heard of that. But prior to the Finders course you can find that online. So it's a course over, I don't know, several months, so people can participate in, that is basically offering let's just call it like evidence-based approaches to spiritual awakening. Wow. But it's based on Jeffrey Martin's work. So Jeffrey Martin, he and a team of researchers, which Gary Weber said was actually a dream team that he put together. What they did is they sent out surveys to over 1,000 people. And from that 1,000 people, they did very in-depth interviews of about 55 people. And Gary Weber was one of those people. And I bring this up because what came of that research, when they asked people, well, what exactly were you doing when, basically this, when, spiritual awakening got underway? And the number one thing were the Goenka Vipassana courses. But another thing came to light was that people were, pretty much everybody was doing, that succeeded with this, in terms of deep stage realization, they were doing at least 2 or 3 different techniques. So when I say 2 or 3 different techniques, it could have been, self-inquiry combined with, let's say, Byron Katie or Sedona method, plus maybe, I don't know, it could be anything else, mantra meditation, could be, yoga, but it was like the combination of modalities. Yeah. And Gary Weber, he was a research scientist. He worked for GE. He was in charge of 4 research divisions. He had a, extensive background as a scientist, but also, really devoted his life toward self-realization very, very seriously. And, he didn't have for much of that time, he didn't have a teacher. And so he was really working on his own. But Yeah, it's kind of interesting how, he, approached this, but, he really felt like people need to take a holistic approach, that if you just try Zen meditation, that's the only thing, right? There's, you're probably not going to succeed at this. You need to bring in other things.
Mm-hmm. That's so, I can just imagine people listening. It would be like so reassuring to hear that, if somebody's really struggling and like this is actually a pretty well researched thing that there are alternatives. So you basically said that the people who were most deeply realized, they tried different things.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny, in one sense, there really is value in telling people in these sorts of traditions to, don't cross-pollinate, because in a sense, and there's a very good intention behind that, which is it's going to convolute your spiritual seeking. It's going to make it like this big web where you're like, one day you're doing self-inquiry, one day you're doing Vipassana. So maybe in a sense, it's very valuable to commit yourself to a practice. But it seems like these people who are deeply realized, I haven't read the study, obviously, just hearing it now, but maybe they reached somewhat of a ceiling with that. And then there was an intuition, like with you, to try other things. And then
Mm-hmm.
that spiraled them forward even further. And that's very much been my case, because I remember just rigidly doing Vipassana and following through, which is perfect. There's nothing wrong with that, I feel like. But I'd also had that instinct that this just doesn't feel complete. Like the translation into daily life isn't there. It's not really what I'm after. And then when I opened myself up to doing things like open awareness based techniques with people like Michael Taft or like self-inquiry, but I'm just struck by gratitude, by like how lucky we are as well. Like all these teachers, like Angelo, like Josh Putnam, like Alma, and like all these, like that little squad. And there's so many other ones that I'm probably unfamiliar with that will come into my awareness. But yeah, doing more of those inquiry techniques, and my God, it just opened things up. It felt like, oh, that's what I was missing. And there was still a lot of doubt and a lot of things in the way, but it felt more holistic to come at it through a different lens rather than just like one rigid way of practice, which just greatly reduced my suffering. And I had to contend with a lot of doubt of attachment to the original technique. But yeah, it definitely felt like I was on the right path when I started to allow myself to do that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I think it's so important for people on a spiritual path to, like, you know, kind of reassess things,
Mm.
on a regular basis. Is this still working for me?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, and, to just not rigidly, keep doing something,
Mm.
just because, somebody else has done it and it's worked for them. I think like that's probably the single biggest thing that I see that people get wrong,
Mm.
where like they just, maybe because their friends are doing it, or like they see somebody on YouTube that is doing things a certain way and talking about it, that they think like that, I'm just going to copy that, and I'll copy this recipe and then I'll succeed.
Mm.
But like
Mm.
the minute that we do that, we're we're moving away from ourselves. We're moving away from our own intuition about what we
Yes.
need.
Our own intuition. Yeah, exactly. That's been the biggest transmission. I think people like Angelo and Violet as well, that they've really helped instill, and just like trust yourself, like really trust yourself. And there's such an aliveness to that, because we're overloaded with information now, that it's very easy to become impressioned by somebody, especially when you're suffering. If you're like in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, and you're seeing someone like on a YouTube video emanating this loving presence and speaking like, this is the one technique, self-inquiry is the only way. And then
Mhm.
and then you're like, oh my God, okay, well, I've just been doing Vipassana, but I guess I'll do that. Then you watch another video, and then they're like, no, noting, the Mahasi Sayadaw noting is the way. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll do that. So no,
Yeah,
shadow work. And, oh God, okay, I've got so much shadow shit. I got to do shadow work now.
yeah,
Speaking from experience. But that real attunement to intuition is like so critical. I feel like, yeah, that's the
yeah,
compass. Like, what do I
yeah,
want? What is deeply true for me? even if the guru, even like someone like Osho, who has a very commanding presence, so like he's clearly got insight, but like what is my truth, you know? And so empowering to live from that place rather than externalizing and having this like savior. It can have like a bit of a victim complex to it as well. Sometimes I've seen in myself like shadow, like I'm suffering so much and I need somebody to save me because I don't know how to save myself. And the middle way of this too, obviously, like sometimes we do need help, and it's not to say we shouldn't seek it, but yeah, I feel like you just know when you're fixating. Like that's the beauty of instinct.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I will say, like I don't like to prescribe, specific practices to people.
Mm.
But one thing I would say that I think is very valuable for just about everybody, whatever stage of their process, is spending time in silence. And I mean, I think I get the feeling a lot of people spend, sizable amount of the time that they have for spiritual practice watching YouTube videos. But I think if we don't necessarily have to meditate. I really don't believe we necessarily have to meditate, but I'm inclined to think that spending time, commit some time to silence is pretty important. And if the resistance is there, which it tends to be, often, especially like in the beginning, that can be a really good inquiry and a place to kind of expose things that are going on that may be overlooked. Like, why is it so hard for me to just sit quietly? I don't have to sit in a formal meditation posture, but to just sit quietly, maybe just with a cup of tea in the backyard, right? Without my cell phone, without anything to distract me. What's here, right? Just to really bring the attention here and, be present with oneself, right? And just to kind of like explore that, like if I think like that can be like maybe like the most important practice if we're going to have any kind of a practice at all.
I love that so much. And that's been highly profitable for me as well. Yeah. Just sitting in silence. Yeah. Not even needing to like formally meditate or anything. Just sit on a chair and just like listen to attune yourself to your deepest, like just right here. I don't even know if you want to call it instinct, but what the hell's happening right here? Like even that feeling of restlessness of needing to like go and get your phone and check something, or like, oh, maybe I can supplement this silence with one of a video of a spiritual video or something. It's like that restlessness is so compelling. It definitely still comes up for me as well. So yeah, it's a good thing to point out.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, just time wise, how you doing? I know it gets late over there, but
Yeah, I'm fine here. Whatever.
great. Yeah, I'm enjoying that. I'm kind of keen to go a little bit deeper with but I wanted to follow that thread that we sort of went on to. Because maybe people might benefit from hearing about what's sort of just recounting your personal experience. So maybe when you started to open up with Gary's work, once you sort of made that Vipassana came to a train stop halt, and then there was that transition phase where you started just a bit of lostness, and then you started moving into more of Gary's work. And I think you said previously like belief investigation and open awareness stuff. How did that translate into daily life from then on?
It's kind of interesting how within, I don't know, several months, I just stumbled upon TRE, and that was a huge year for me. That year that I discovered that, really cannot say enough about how life-changing that was. And I think I was just so energetically messed up, from especially like all of that, striving in Vipassana, that I had gotten more messed up energetically than when I had started. And the TRE was just absolutely dynamite in terms of really clearing that out and just putting me into a place where it was really easy to kind of, start working one-on-one with Gary. I really wasn't up against the energetic challenges. They were gone. My mind was just so quiet. Like I was kind of blown away at how much inner silence was there. After I quit Vipassana, like that was kind of interesting to me, that I stopped the meditating, did Vipassana, and within a year, just the amount of inner silence that just emerged, and just really gave me so much insight about that. So when I started working with Gary, it was really interesting, really exploring a lot of stuff around, let's say, beliefs, judgment, and taking, he encouraged me to keep a journal, just, as a reference, like, so if I try something, just to kind of make a note, does this seem to be working or not? A little bit of a tantric approach in the sense of, working with, different mantras. He suggested several mantras to try. And then just to kind of see, does one feel particularly interesting? If so, you can try working with this for a while. Stuff like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
So he was quite diverse in his approach and was sort of just feeling out maybe what you might benefit from.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right.
Yeah, definitely did not take a cookie cutter approach with people. And so, in the Zoom sessions with him, there was definitely, transmission, in the session, and pointing that was going on. But, giving me, like ideas of things to explore, and things to look into, so it was very rich. I think I spent about 3.5 years working with him, and so much happened in that time.
It's hard to recollect, right? It's like these tricky parts of the story. But I think to circle back, even before you started working with Gary and you transitioned to TRE, right? So there was this that was sort of followed up beyond the Vipassana. And then, so what sort of shifts were you noticing originally when you opened up to doing TRE? And I'll just say for people, if people listening, trauma release exercises, sort of made by David Baselli, made or I guess put a framework around TRE, which has also been very profound for me. And you've introduced me to that. And I just want to add as well, you work with people with TRE and also awakening, and you're absolutely amazing at it. So I would highly recommend people check you out if this is resonating. But yeah, but specifically with you, the TRE, and like, so what did you start to notice initially, and then more and more so as you shifted from Vipassana to TRE, in terms of showing up into daily life and bringing the Dharma more so out into daily life, if you could say it that way?
Yeah. Well, I would say it was a huge falling away of reactivity. That was really, quite amazing. And resistance patterns, just, like I would say that in my experience, it's really hard to get at that if you can't really feel into the body, which I think a lot of people have a lot of issues with that. There's just like so much chronic tension and freeze that people are missing, literally, like a lot of, felt sensation, of what's going on there.
Did you say even Vipassana meditators as well?
Yeah. And like the thing is if you're on retreat, of course, like it's different. Like the body's going to open up quite a bit, right? And it is like, in a lot of ways, quite similar to, I think, psychedelics, in that you're in a different state of consciousness. You're sensing a lot more that you wouldn't have access to this in normal waking day consciousness. It's just not like that. Even when you go home and you do 2 hours a day, you're still not accessing those states of consciousness, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it was a pretty astonishing falling off of the reactivity. Yeah, just, just feeling really, I don't know, just incredible equanimity emerging, inner silence, equanimity. They were both really emerging quite a bit. Starting to get glimpses of, like non-dual realization as well.
Mm-hmm.
Or, things would kind of flatten out, and uh, I really noticed it driving around where things would go 2D. And I had, at times, there was so much equanimity, but at the same time, I felt like, wow, I've got to remind myself these cars around me have a lot of weight. But it was almost like things were like paper thin and kind of surreal in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Bit
Wow.
trippy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it stabilized. Like I had, like it would kind of come and go. And I didn't understand it, like what that was. I didn't have anybody around talking about it. I'd never read about it. I didn't know it, like this was a thing that people experienced. Yeah.
Yeah, right. You didn't even have the context for it. So maybe Gary added that on later. And I'll just, or just your intuition or whatever. But I'll also add that for me, the unfreezing of emotions in the body through more physical modalities, like I've done quite a few now, like Qigong, even just exercise is pretty powerful, and I think it's great. Somatic inquiry that I facilitate with, but also like yeah, just TRE, man, it so simple, but the unfreezing of these chronically held emotions it just seems to have this I think what it did for me, if I think about it in relation to like transitioning from a meditation practice to more so allowing myself to let those tension knots unwind, was I think there was a subtle agenda that I still wanted to feel better, and I was holding out for meditation to do that for me. Even when I was doing somatic inquiry and stuff, which I still think to be very valuable. But it's almost like TRE created such a positive, energetic experience quite quickly that it helped dispel the illusion that spirituality was going to make me feel better. And it helped it shift more so toward focusing on insight of like, who am I? Because spirituality, I mean, or awakening, I guess you could say, it's not really about feeling better at all, but that it's almost like the body can, what I noticed in my experience was like TRE and the opening of the body almost just helped dispel the surrounding illusions that then allowed a more natural inquiry into like, what is this to precipitate, because I'm not so much focusing on because TRE is providing this this very genuine relief, where I'm no longer like relying on leaning on spirituality or awakening based practices to then give me that relief that I was actually after. It's like, okay, TRE is actually doing something, so now I can yeah, and I'm actually noticing this like tightness that was in my chest or something, like unraveling. And like we had sessions where I've just been like, the last one we had, I was just tearing up. Like it felt so beautiful, like so natural to
Mhm.
release that, So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. There's so much I could say about TRE and what it can do for,
Mm,
for people on a spiritual path. Uh,
yeah. It's very
one of the
passionate.
things they're up against is, conditioning, right? Like there's conditioning that we have. Um, you know, even like I would say most people have some, if not outright addiction, some level of compulsivity in their makeup,
Mm,
right? And what's driven by that, like what's driving that is some internal angst, right?
mm,
And I think that TRE helps, it really helps to get to the root of that angst that's driving that compulsivity to go and, distract yourself or, indulge in, something like, I don't know, it could be cannabis or alcohol or what behavioral thing doesn't matter what it is really, but it's like that self-soothing behavior, like what's at the root of that. And, being able to eradicate that or get it to calm down a lot is going to help a lot. We have to also consider that, part of the function of the egoic identity is to manage trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're just kind of coming at that with inquiry, right? I think that we're potentially going to encounter a lot of difficulty, a lot of unnecessary difficulty if we're not actively addressing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, spot on. Yeah, it's definitely been my experience. Yeah, because it's almost like the inquiry is almost too dry. It felt like it definitely has a place, and like it's not like binary or it's TRE or it's inquiry or it's like somatic release or it's inquiry. It's like they seem to dance together in my experience. So like I'm doing TRE and then all of a sudden a very natural inquiry comes into like who am I? And then I don't know, like and it's just this very spontaneous natural thing that happens. And also like and I've spoken to Richmond Heath about this, and I'll put that interview up soon. But I love how he speaks specifically about the like the spiritual aspects of the letting go, the falling into of experience, and the trusting of experience, so that and he cited a very something that stuck with me was that I believe they've done studies where they've noticed that like action precedes thought. So thought actually, like we go up to stand up to go into the kitchen or something, and then thought will subtly come in after that and say like, I'm going to go to the kitchen. And we believe the thought to be us. But like what TRE really shows you experientially at a deep level is that we are not in control. Like it's like your body has this natural instinct, and everything is perfectly managed in the unborn, just to use that phrase. The body just takes care of itself, and things get done, and like work gets done, and thoughts can still arise, but like it's that's something that TREs really help show me, while also having the added benefit of like feeling better as well, like significantly better, which is amazing.
Absolutely. I think like it really makes it really helps facilitate this whole awakening process by allowing you to be alone with yourself in an effortless way, right? Like you don't have to struggle. It's in even a way that you feel even connected to yourself. Like I think this is another thing that people are a lot, experience a lot. It's just that feeling of disconnection. In fact, I think like this is something that is understood about trauma. Like first we disconnect from ourselves and then we disconnect from other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and you see that with people like social anxiety is a big one with that, that's where direction I'm taking my channel a lot lately. I'm so fascinated by it. But yeah, like yeah, I don't know if I don't know if there's much more to say.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe if we could, I think could be maybe spend a few minutes just talking about relationships.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. I mean, well, yeah, because a big focus of my stuff is now on social anxiety and working with people. But when you say relationships, what are you specifically referring to?
Yeah, you know what? What I'm thinking about is, well, I mean, certainly social anxiety comes into this, but also reactivity,
Mm.
conflict, relational conflict. But something I find really fascinating is attachment theory.
Hmm.
And I think of this too, like especially for people that are moving through this awakening process with aspirations to get into deep stage realization. And do you know a bit about attachment theory?
No, I'd be curious to see how you talk about it. I have ideas of what it is, but I don't think I've officially been like read or educated on it. Mm.
It's one of those psychological theories that turns out to be, I think, pretty practical for a lot of people to just be aware of it. It's pretty, easy to inform yourself about what it is, what we understand about it. But in a nutshell, what it is uh, we can say about probably half of the population has enough early childhood developmental trauma that it's affecting them in adult relationship. And it's not just like in a romantic relationship, but it extends to all relationships.
Mm.
And it has to do with, primarily the first year of life, but also, like the first several years of life, where if our primary caregiver wasn't, let's say, sufficiently attuned to us, then what happens is you could say that our sense of trust in another human being to be there when we need them, gets that trust gets violated, so that it when we're older, when we come into a place where we are, let's say, in an emotionally vulnerable place, then, there's something in us that gets triggered. It's like we don't want to go there because this is unconscious, but it's kind of like, something in us knows we've been in an emotionally vulnerable place before, and, we've been wounded. So it expresses itself as, for example, like avoidant behavior, like somebody will subtly sabotage, intimate, emotionally intimate, situations.
Right.
For example, or anxious, like the partner that's never reassured enough that, their partner actually loves them and won't leave them. Like it looks like that. And I find myself, when I meet with people, bringing this up sometimes, especially like if they're in a relationship, and, just kind of pointing out that these kinds of, let's say, emotional wounds, they have to be addressed. If your aspiration is to keep going with this awakening process, then those parts of you that are wounded, right? It's going to have to be healed. Like, this is like the thing about awakening, is that those wounds in us, those traumas, those things that are kind of like unconscious to us, it has to all be fleshed up. It has to all come into the light of day and be addressed. And Gary was really clear about that. Like, he, had a very, very challenging early childhood, experienced a lot of abuse, and, was aware of these, early childhood developmental traumas in himself, and, was self-aware enough to realize like how it was playing out. I think for him, it was like avoidant behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And he said for him, he said at the end of his process, like as he was getting into deeper stage realization, he had studied with two of the most respected Zen teachers in the US. But he said at the end, it was his wife who became his final and best Zen teacher. And it was working to dismantle this pattern of, not allowing himself to be emotionally vulnerable. This was like basically the place that he had to, work on, to get to, the deepest stages of realization. And I thought that was so beautiful. And, one of the things that Gary has said, he said, he thinks that there's a lot of people out there that, live alone or maybe in a monastery and imagine themselves to be highly realized. But he said, if you took them out and you put them into a relationship or a family situation, he said, I think it would quickly fall apart. I think he's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and does Gary talk about, or maybe I don't know if this has come up for you in your experience too. I remember you talked about your son and that really tough time and stuff like that. Probably would have been quite a poignant time to do these sorts of investigations. But, like, how does that how does Gary point people in that way, or what have you learned to be valuable for that place? Like we have TRE to help release the energy, but for me that would come into like somatic inquiry as well. So if you're feeling like particularly triggered in a situation, really letting yourself feel the intensity of the emotion, like with this really like deep curiosity, like, oh my God, here's that avoidant pattern that has come up for me in the past, and I can feel it like wanting to justify its right to be here. And like, oh, it damn well wants to do something, like it wants to take action. And it feels like it's the realest thing in the whole universe. So that's where I would, I'll speak from what I would do. Like I would feel that very directly and just give myself permission to sit with it like full on, let it just take over the body and like explore its view, like what's actually going on here, with this like very like open-minded curiosity as to what it is.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. I think like paying attention to those internal sensations and looking
Mm.
at, you know, what, uh, you know, what are the beliefs, how is this being experienced coming into this vulnerable place? What would it take to let that go? Can
Mm.
you let it go? What
Mm.
would that look like, right? It A lot of it boils down to just I would say the capacity to feel safe. Safety is a really big thing here, right? And it's not something that we can just like mentally come at and decide, oh, okay, now I know it's about safety. I'm going to just tell myself to feel safe. It's not. It's like, it's a very deeply visceral thing. And I think like the way I see it, like the attachment wounds are probably like for a lot of people who have attachment wounds, like this is going to be like the deepest work.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
not that it need to take, a long time, but I think that we need to be like in some relationship situation, we don't have to necessarily have a romantic partner, you
Mm.
know, um, but somebody that we can, I think that if we can find somebody that we feel trust in, right? Uh, that we can allow ourselves to be emotionally vulnerable and work on this, I think can be really, really valuable. And I think
Mm.
like it's not just for, our capacity to be in relationship. I think it's a big part of the awakening process as well, to let go of that, that need to kind of like self-protect, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it's definitely been the experience here too. Um,
Mm.
like there's definitely things that are still there and that's still unfolding, and just it feels like a snowball rolling down a hill now. It's like it's totally fine to that there's all sorts of psychological things that are still there, but yeah, there's definitely a knowing that exposure and being out in daily life is like just sitting in a room and meditating isn't really where the goal is. It's really out in the most uncomfortable situations. And um yeah, like we can, and I guess we can also fixate either way, right? Like this is something Alma pointed out to me is like, you can almost like hear that, then okay, I'm going to go seek a relationship, and that's going to be the incentive, that's the thing that's going to wake me up once I get in the relationship, because then I'll have that conditioning available. But it's also like, well, no, awakening's right here as well. However, if you're like, it's like you can fixate too much on then setting that up as this thing, like, okay, the next big sentinel, like juggernaut for me to come up against is a relationship then. But it's like, okay, maybe there is something there, but also you can find it here right now, always.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, man, relationships, my God, like talk about shit show. Like,
Um,
oh my God, and yeah, it's like, because for me, social anxiety has been huge, right? Like, um, way less now. Like, oh my God, it's night and day. But I remember like how brutal that was when I was meditating, doing like things like Vipassana, and
mm,
wondering like, why is this practice not working? Why is this not giving me what the goods? Like, why is this not getting rid of this social angst, and like being so humiliated by it, and like ashamed of myself for not being a good meditator, and all this shit that was coming on. Yeah, and just doubting the practice, and like hopelessness and helplessness, because like social angst it's so pervasive, and like in the sense that it affects everything. It affects your ability, like you've got to work, you've got to talk with people, and then like, oh my God, like that all compiling onto itself in this like hopelessness spiral of like really just wanting to connect with other humans, but being so helpless, and like you're really trying to, I'll say I was really trying to get that relief, so I can then just interrelate and have these conversations like we are right now, and just not be so guarded all the time, and that comes into like, yeah, the belief work, and the willingness just to go out into daily life,
Yeah.
and TRE is very helpful. Belief work, somatic work, like whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a thread there that is pick upable why this that felt more ranty, but yeah, I don't know. Social anxiety, man, it's a big one for me. I know you've mentioned it has been there for you as well, I think.
Yeah, I was it's again, how it's kind of funny how I don't know, there can be things that are in your psychological, experience, emotional experience, and you're not even aware of it, right?
Mhm.
And I really truly wasn't aware of how socially anxious I was, right? Until I discovered TRE. And it was, I don't know, it's hard for me to remember now because it was really like a 1-2 year process, like 8-9 years ago now.
Mm.
And it was a falling away of the social anxiety that made me realize it had been there. And it was just like this incredible freedom going into social situations and just feeling like, such a freedom that I'd never had. That I told Angelo, like, that was actually one of the best things for me with this whole awakening process was the freedom of the social anxiety.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest incentives that motivated me to want to get into Vipassana retreats in the first place, actually, was the freedom from that, because it was so it just felt like there was something so fundamentally off with the way that I was relating with other people, especially as I opened up more spiritually, and that all the repressed emotions were coming up. It was just like I couldn't hide from it anymore.
Mm.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. I found like it just gave me so much more bandwidth overall, like just to bring to the whole like inquiry process, looking at everything else,
Yeah, 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 exactly. And yeah, man, like so much I could say about social anxiety. There's so many nuances, especially as it relates to spirituality as well.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I look forward to kind of checking in with you from time to time just to see, your perspective on TRE as it relates to that. I'm really curious because
Yeah.
this is something, I've heard from, quite a few people that I've worked with, some that have not just like, let's call it like, um, you know, more typical levels of social anxiety, but really crippling levels of social anxiety that is really impacted their life in a very significant way in, just being able to function.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and to see that completely fall away, completely,
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
It's amazing.
so
Like that is, there's as that saying Angelo would say, it's like water in the desert, and my God, like because it's so simple too, Um, and I feel like it's really good specifically for people with social anxiety. And this is what I've noticed as well, because I did a lot of shadow work and active investigation, like looking at beliefs with using thoughts, right? So thoughts and sensations, and feeling out beliefs. Okay, I was triggered in that social situation. What was going on for me there, and feeling into it. Although when you actually feel relief from that, and I think, but it is very important to do so. But what I notice it does, and this is the thing with socially anxious people, is there's a lot of internal reflection happening, a lot of internal reflection. And when there's an incentive that like shadow work is working and it's doing something and it's actually transmuting some of these very chronically held sensations in the body, there can be so much there still. So what happens is we do this internal reflective thing even more. Like, okay, I just got triggered in that situation. Now I'm going to process that. Then I got triggered in that situation. I'm going to process that. Oh, now there's this other thing. And then we're so internal, doing the shadow work and stuff. Well, I've noticed that for me, but TRE has been super valuable because especially when you bring in an investigation of just softening away from thoughts and just bringing it back into the body, bringing your attention back into the body, bringing your attention back into the body. Oh, there's a thought, there's a reflective thought, bringing it back into the body, and then letting the body move and shake and do its thing that it naturally knows how to do. It's a really strong antidote to the hyper reflective mind, actually, that's constantly thinking about what other people are thinking of it. Like, am I making too much eye contact? What are they thinking of me? When at least in the way that I've learned to attune to TRE, and especially in like noticing thoughts and bringing it back into the body, that can then translate over into daily life where you have that added relief where you're shaking off stress of the social situation. But then you're also training your mind in a way to not be so reflective in nature. So you can still do the shadow work. You can still inquire like, oh, wow, I just got triggered to the shit house in that situation. So I'm going to feel that and process what belief is going on. But there's also this middle way that TRE really, I've noticed, helps people with, which is what's helped myself with, and I think other people like you've just been describing, is it really softens that reflexivity. And I think it actually has a term. It's like hyper reflexivity. When I was studying Dr. Willie Britton's stuff, but yeah, I don't know if you relate to that at all, but yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you think about the autonomic nervous system, right, like a large function of it was to help us to just, have the energy, to run or fight, right, so that we would survive individually, collectively. And it's like that that autonomic nervous system, has just been so messed up, right? That it's
God, yeah.
firing in a way that, I had this, I don't know, kind of like, I don't know, analogy come to me in the last few weeks about how I see it's almost similar to the immune system and the rise of autoimmune disorders. So we have this very intelligent immune system, right? So that it takes out, pathogens, bacteria, viruses, and so on. But in, the world today, we have like this epidemic of autoimmune disorders. And I think it's, in a way, kind of something similar, with the autonomic nervous system, that it's meant to help us survive, right? But in a way, it's working against us. And I think it's, for people on a spiritual path, it really helps to gain some, basic knowledge about this and to understand that a lot of what they're thinking about, in looking at themselves, if we look at it through the lens of the autonomic nervous system, it just makes it so much simpler.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because so many meditators and stuff are coming into this practice with thinking they've broken their brains or something, and that becomes the new baseline that we're then trying to escape out of, actually, with the meditative practices that become doubled down on. And it almost becomes like this view that you're looking at through the world, like this is just how reality is, what like an escalated autonomic nervous system. This is just how it is. It's how it's always going to be. But yeah, it's amazing seeing how like TRE and somatic modalities of some degree can really like shake that up and almost like break the VR headset that you've been looking through your whole life, ever since you started practicing or whatever, And it's just such a contrast, such a huge contrast.
Yeah, I think, it's like, the contribution that, like people like Wilhelm Reich have made to this, understanding. Like, I mean, I think it's just so valuable for people on a spiritual path, to understand that, like that chronic tension, like that is the body freezing around
Mm.
repressed emotion, right? How can you, if you think about it, right? Like something like social anxiety, if you've got all of this chronic tension, right? Repressed emotion, right? Like it's like, how can you expect the, autonomic nervous system to be reading the environment correctly? It's like the resources are being strained, right?
Yes.
That's the way I see it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, because like it was so habitual for me to walk into a social situation and basically just have like a really tight gut or like tight chest or something. And that basically is the autonomic nervous system trying to brace for impact. And that's definitely still unraveling for me. Like there's still tightness and tension quite a lot, but
Mm.
as that transition is happening, it really does feel like that, like I said, like the VR headset's cracking, and it's like, wow, there really is like a open-hearted and non-vulnerable, non-guarded way of interrelating with people. And it's beautiful. And one thing I'll say to that as well is another sort of shift that's really helped me here is attuning to, call it like awareness, or but more spaciousness, actually, like more spaciousness, because I feel like in this it's been very energetic actually. It used to be this orientation of like going into a social situation and then looking for like what's going wrong with the body so that I can then be with it, so I can then transmute it or something like that. But it's almost like this intention of opening up awareness and relaxing, and it creates, and almost like this intention of, maybe I don't have social anxiety. Maybe I don't
Mm.
need to hold on to this hot coal anymore. And
Yeah.
then it's like this softening and opening up. And then rather than this funneling in and trying to transmute or something, it's like, okay, like, but then still honoring the content with that openness of like being able to feel the sensation, but then not having that almost like view, that background view that I'm looking through of there's something wrong with this experience. It's like, actually, no, I can just be exactly as I am in an open, relaxed, curious space. And maybe I don't have social anxiety. And maybe it's totally okay that I have social anxiety. It's just phenomena that's arising here.
Mm.
And that's it's just it's such a like subtle thing, but just the openness and the willingness to contend the fact that social anxiety is even something that I need to worry about is
Mm.
just a huge perspective shift. It's like coming out of a victim mindset to it that I didn't even realize it was there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, just something in the identity, that
Mm. Yeah.
mm.
All right, Chris. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, awesome.
love
Uh,
speaking with you. People get heaps and heaps out of this. I can already tell. So, yeah, yeah, and awesome. Yeah, so much gratitude for you. So much I can't wait to see the interview as well that you've done coming up. And yeah. So, is there anywhere that you want to point people to follow up and get in more in contact with you?
I mean, they can go to my website,
Hmm.
uh,
I'll put it in the
and
description.
yeah, yeah. And I think I spoke with Angelo about posting in the community
Mhm.
for his YouTube channel
Mhm.
for TRE group sessions. So that'll be coming up. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So, how can people get a hold of you for that?
Yeah, just to look in the community
Right.
section of his.
Okay, great. Right, right. So he's made a post there.
It'll
Gotcha.
be, yeah. Well, it's not there now, but it will be coming.
Okay, great. Yeah, cool. Awesome.